Hi everyone, Meryl from Diffbot here, and today we're going to look at pulling data from the world's largest knowledge graph into a spreadsheet of your choice. I should add that this will be a hands-on demo and you can follow along. If you have a Diffbot trial or subscription, you'll just need your API key to log into Excel or Google Sheets integrations. If not, and you would like to follow along, we have a free 2-week trial, no strings attached, no credit card needed. You can quickly sign up at app.diffbot.com/get-started. And a great time to do that would be during the intro portion of this talk. So before we jump in, why would we want to pull knowledge graph data into a spreadsheet? So a few reasons here. Probably the most prominent reason is that spreadsheets are locations users are comfortable with. We know how to manipulate data and highlight trends. For many marketers, sales teams, and project managers, spreadsheets are where a lot of their data lives. Spreadsheets are also a low-tech way to mash up data from different sources. Export to CSV exists in many other programs where our org data lives, and you don't need to bring technical team members into the loop to get some results most of the time. Third, spreadsheets are quick, cheap, and expendable. In short, they're sort of informal, but they work. So our objective here today isn't to make the most beautiful or comprehensive dashboard. It's not to compete with your bespoke interface or your CRM that you've had a lot of customization work done to, or anything that elaborate. Rather, it's just to show some building blocks and what types of data you can pull into spreadsheets with Diffbot integrations. So as we've mentioned, we're pulling data from the knowledge graph. Overall, you don't need to know much at all about the knowledge graph to dive into spreadsheets, but there are a few details that may be helpful to know. So Diffbot's KG is the largest publicly available KG. Unlike, say, Google search result knowledge panels, Diffbot's knowledge graph shares all the underlying data with you. So you can really dive in and explore rather than just being a consumer of a brief snippet of curated information. Secondly, knowledge graphs are comprised of entity types. Entities here are people, places, and things. And just like in the real world, there are different facts that are important about different entity types. So a funding round may be an important fact for an organization, one of our entity types, while an educational history may be important for a person entity, another one of our entity types. So just keep this in mind that different fact types are returned from different entity types. In our talk, we'll 100% be dealing with org, person, and article entities. Next up, our Excel and Google Sheets integrations have slightly different functionality. The main KG interface enables you to access many more entity types, so don't expect to be able to do everything you could do in the knowledge graph within a spreadsheet. Rather, our integrations are built for a specific subset of tasks. So these tasks include data enrichment, exploratory market intelligence research, the ability to search for person entities, org entities, and article entities. And finally, our knowledge graph is sourced from the public web. So we crawl a vast majority of the web and we update our knowledge graph every few days. This means your call to the KG within your spreadsheet will update every few days if new information surfaces about an entity. So yeah, now that we've covered a few basics, let's jump right in. So to begin with either one of our integrations, you'll need to grab your API key, which you could find at app.diffbot.com. Once you've logged in, you click right in the upper right corner, and you can copy the full API, the pull token from the ensuing page. So first up, we're going to start with Excel. If you've never loaded Diffbot's Excel add-in, you'll need to head to the Microsoft Excel add-in store and search for Diffbot. Here's where you would click Get It Now, and that would install it on your instance of Excel. You'll just need the email associated with your Excel installation. So once you have installed it, you can head right over to Excel, and you should see the Diffbot add-in right to the right of your home tab up here. And the very first time you log on, you will need to sign in or register just by pasting your token, and you're logged in. So I should add here that this is going to be a very informal dashboard, the type you can quickly add and delete charts from, and really just a bit of a workbook. But I'll share a few techniques and how they can work together for both market intel as well as finance or sales / ABM uses. So To start, let's say we're building a prospect or an ABM list. Honestly, a lot of great overlap with this sort of analysis for finance, investing, and market intelligence as well. You just may be looking at a slightly different subset of organizations. So we can head over to search, and let's say we're looking for AI companies in the US with less than 100 employees. So we can start to type. So if you click, you can scroll down. We can choose from many, many different fields. But let's head down to software companies. Select artificial intelligence companies. Minimum of 1 employee, maximum of 100. Let's say we want them to be from the United States. And we want them to have been founded 2 years ago. Let's say the start of July. 2 years ago, which returns about 769 organizations. So now that we've established our query here, we can click next, go to our output screen, and just for the sake of illustration, I'm going to return every available field here. And, you know, it takes a moment, depending on the number of results, but it fills up fairly quickly with a wide range of fields. You know, we have AI-generated descriptions, we have employee counts, we have different social media profiles, homepage, Crunchbase, location, investment rounds, their type and their amount, the individual investors, we have industries, all of these many, many fields. And we also have, you know, a particularly interesting one, which is where our machine learning enabled field of estimated revenue for private organizations. So if we want to start visualizing this data, we need to take our returned organizations and turn these into a table. You know, fairly common Excel-based tactic. So we select all fields. We can click Control T, and the first thing we will want to do is name our table. I'm going to name it AI Orgs. So the first thing I would do if I wanted to start visualizing some of this data is I would click on our table here, and I would click Insert Pivot Table. It's rightly selected the proper table AI Orgs, and let's say I want to place this pivot table on a new worksheet. So let's say we want to get started with a bit of a bird's eye view here. We have a ton of fields we can pivot on, but let's say we want to look into funding rounds. This org has gotten into, I don't know, employee count, where they're located, and their revenue. At this point, maybe we're just looking for interesting data points or outliers. So we can actually make all of these charts in very similar ways. So let's start with location. So we can place city as the rows, and then a count of city as the values. Let's go ahead and sort this in descending order by count. So we can see that many of these AI companies are in San Francisco, New York, LA, Boston, Palo Alto, sort of where you would expect. So we'll make charts in just a second, but let's just go ahead and get all of our data set up here. So let's insert another pivot table, specify the table of AI orgs right here. And let's say that in this case, we want to look at funding rounds. So these are all these investment fields, and we actually have multiple because organizations have many different funding rounds. So let's do funding round 1, second pivot table right here, AI orgs. Let's do investment series 2. And we are just getting counts here, you know, and notice how you can already start to see a trend. Many fewer of these organizations have made it to a second funding round. Not all of the organizations even made it to a first publicly disclosed funding round. And just for comprehensiveness, let's go ahead and add the third funding round right here. And let's see, what else did we want to include? Let's say we wanted to include revenue. You could also search up top once you know what you're looking for here. And in this case, let's actually plot revenue against the name of the company. And like the first chart, let's sort these all by the numerical values, just so we can start to get a look at what's going on here. And in Excel, the order that the pivot table values are in also determines the order in the chart. So the charts will look a little nicer if they are in descending or ascending order. And for our final field, let's just pull in employee count. We know that all of these are under 100 employees. But let's see if we can see any trends. Maybe we're looking for organizations of a specific size that are, well funded or just went through a funding round and maybe still haven't quite expanded their headcount yet. It depends on the use case, but this is just to survey what the types of values you can return into Excel. In this case, we don't want a sum. We want a count. So to clarify here, this would be employees, and this would actually be number of orgs. So basically, all of these are startups, essentially. So, the actual charting here is fairly trivial. Let's just pull in some charts to start seeing what trends pop out. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to make all these charts, and then I will move them into a bit of a dashboard here. And all I'm doing here is recommended charts. Most of these types of values plot the best just onto a column chart or a pie chart. Round 2, funding round 3. And this is a bit repetitious, but once you get these values set up, you can refresh the values in your initial organization output tab. You can rerun these queries, or you can replace or you can pull in values from a different industry. You can alter your original query and have all of these charts update in the end. And that's a bit of the live aspect. That we associate with sort of dashboards. And what you could do here is say informal dashboard, and we can move each one of these charts over here. So let's see what we can tell from our dashboard. So we can see that there's actually a solid cluster of AI startups outside of the Bay Area, which is interesting. Maybe this is useful for a sales circuit or for a finance use case. But as expected, Palo Alto and San Francisco are up close to the top, as well as San Jose. We can see that a vast majority of these less than 2-year-old AI companies have quite low revenue, or in this case, estimated revenue. If we stretch this out, we can get a little more granularity. And there are a few of these companies that are bringing in a few $1 million a year in revenue. But they're small companies. We can see a cluster of their size. About 300 of these companies have around 5 employees. But we can see that, there's another cluster of close to 200 companies that have a head count of 30. All of these companies are under 100 individuals. So, fairly small startups, maybe ready to expand. And then we can take a look at what investment series they've made it to. So notice that many organizations have initial pre-seed or seed funding rounds, with a few jumping straight into Series A. By the second round, many fewer, you can tell by this axis, corporations have raised a second round, but convertible note and Series A have surfaced as slightly more prominent. And then by the final funding round, we're seeing, in all likelihood, a third of all funding rounds not being pre-seed or seed anymore, convertible notes growing in prominence, and a handful, or I should say one, of these 700 companies making it to a Series B. And, this is potentially useful information for many use cases, for market intelligence, marketing, sales, finance. So, we've made some of these initial charts, but you may be wondering about the dashboard a bit, the live aspect of a dashboard. So if you head back over to your pivot tables, you can actually right-click on one, click on Pivot Table Options, head to Data, and refresh data when opening the file. And so what this lets you do is you can change your organization's output tab. You can reopen Excel and have all of your charts fully updated. So you can get changing views of quite a large set of organizations. And note that once you toggle one pivot table this way, all the pivot tables and all the pivot charts default to refreshing their data on program reopening. So one additional feature that can be very, very useful for this sort of exploratory data is, a way to mine in and gain an insight about a few companies you surface. So let's say that, 10 of these companies really caught our interest for some reason. So I'm going to open a new tab, and I am just going to paste in the top 10 companies. Let me grab the header row as well. You can head back to the menu, you can head to lookalike, and all we need to do is specify a unique identifier, and an organization name. The more fields you can give this, the better it will be at matching these organizations, but this should totally be fine, particularly if we include the Diffbot unique identifier. This will 100% match. And then we will head to lookalike, or actually we need to change the sheet name here to match that name right there. And we will return all fields. And let's change the name of the output tab to lookalike. And after we execute, you can see basically what this is returning is for each one of our input organizations. For example, Syntegra, Uniter, Erudite. We are returning 25 organizations that are the most similar to that input organization among the millions and millions of orgs in the knowledge graph. So this is a way to return. We inputted 10 and we get back 250 organizations that have been parsed with machine learning and AI to make this composite field that is basically a similarity score. And obviously these are the same fields we outputted with our initial query. So you could pipe all of these lookalike orgs, sort of expand your audience, expand your lens, and pipe all of these to the exact same charts previously. One final very common use case we see for pulling in knowledge graph data into Excel is when you have some of your own data and you want to enrich it in some way. So in this case, I'm just going to create a sample input data set. Let's say that for some reason I had a list of these organizations. Maybe they'd joined our newsletter, maybe they'd visited our site, things like that. As long as I have a custom ID and a name or a URL, I can head over to Enhance over here and specify, my custom ID, my organization name, and in this case I do have a URL. Next, all of the fields, actually let's change this to Enhance. And here we are with the exact same custom IDs. So we can, let's say we had more information than this. Maybe we had contact information or what sales stage these individuals were in. We can merge it back in by the custom ID, and we can have all of these auxiliary data points. These are some of the initial ways you can start pulling together sort of these exploratory dashboards, sort of these building blocks of dashboards into spreadsheets for use in market intelligence, ABM, sales, or finance within Excel. Next up, I want to jump into Google Sheets, which, as I mentioned at the start of the talk, actually provides a different experience around knowledge graph data. But it starts off in a similar way. You're going to, again, need your token, and you're going to need to get the add-on, essentially, from the add-on store. Yeah, if you haven't not done this in the past, you go to add-ons, get add-on. You can search for Diffbot. It's called Diffbot for Sheets. That would be how you install it the first time. I obviously already have it installed. But you'll go to Diffbot for Sheets, log in, you will pass your Diffbot token, and as you're initially playing around with this, I would recommend having the Getting Started guide open. It's over to the right, and it has some tips and tricks, explanations of the different commands you can enter. But yeah, as I mentioned, the Google Sheets plugin works a little differently. Basically, there are a few custom functions, Google Sheets functions that we can utilize. If you've never utilized a Google Sheet function, there are many guides online to help you get started with this. And then they utilize Diffbot Query Language, or DQL. And this lets you return almost any set of entities from the knowledge graph directly into Sheets. The flip side is that you'll need to know how to craft DQL queries. You can also, if you've played around at all in the knowledge graph, use the visual query editor, which is where I'm at now, knowledge graph search. And let's say I wanted to return all agricultural organizations. I did it in the visual query editor, but over here, I can copy and paste my query. So let's actually jump into another query. Let's say we want renewable energy companies, and we want them to be in Texas. So, and this is an example of a common, market intel or finance use case. We have fantastic long tail org data. As you can see, there are over 6,000 renewable energy companies in Texas alone. But let's see how we would pull this into Google Sheets. So if you don't know how to, from memory, type out DQL, this is a good format. You head over to the visual query editor and you'll copy and paste your query. And what you'll need to do here is you'll use the DQL function. It takes essentially 3 fields. It takes a DQL query, it takes the fields you want returned, and then the maximum number of entities you want returned. And what you need to know here is that you will need to change all double quotes to single quotes for this initial DQL query, as the double quotes delineate the edges of this parameter. So, and for fields here, you can also pass in a another cell. For example, I want the name returned here. Let's say I want 20 of these organizations. And we can actually drag across. Note that it is each time referencing the field directly above. So we quickly got, home pages, the addresses, the revenues, and the unique identifiers. So one interesting thing about being able to use DQL is you can actually reach out and return any entity type. So like, let's say we wanted the 20 most recent articles. Maybe we're going to pass them to one of the functions we can use here is natural language processing. So we can return sentiment and entities. So one trick you can use here is, because articles have different lines, they're on many lines, and you want them to all fit into a given cell, you can use clean, and then start your DQL call. And in this case, I'm going to use concatenate so that I could grab this unique Diffbot identifier that's in cell E2 in this case. And I'm going to say return all articles that have been tagged with the URI from, in this case, Calpine, or next row would be Reliant Energy. And the field I want returned is text. And I want, say, 20 articles. And here are the 20 most recent articles, just the text for them all popped out. Another, sort of interesting thing is we can, if we're returning numbers field, we're obviously in a spreadsheet, so you can just right off the bat do some calculations. So let's say we want to average the sentiment of the last 1,000 articles. And for this size org that we've pulled up, this is likely all the articles written about them. And so a very similar format to the last cell. Except for I'm going to return the field of sentiment this time, and 1,000 of them. And if you don't know which fields to ask to return, you can look inside of the knowledge graph to see what fields are naturally returned, or you can head to Diffbot's documentation, where there's a list of all the fields that are attached to particular entity types. So sentiment comes back on a range of -1, very negative, to 1, very positive. So this starts to become interesting. Synagro has slightly negative sentiment. We can pull this out on a chart, obviously, to sort of start seeing trends here. Yeah, so it looks like Lockwood International has by far the most negative sentiment. We have Gexa Energy that has quite a positive sentiment around themselves. But you can see how we can start to build this into dashboard-like elements, and particularly for our article index, which is updated just basically constantly as we crawl the web. And if you're dealing with something like Fortune 1000 companies, you can gain a dashboard that's updating all the time. The cool thing about these DQL calls in Google Sheets is that they literally update every time you reopen your sheet, or you respecify the DQL call. So this would be an example of, we have a tab called competitors. Let's say we're in this space and it's renewable energy in Texas. Next up, let's make a little bit of maybe an industry overview. If you've played around with DQL at all, you probably know about facet queries. If not, we have a number of other great videos about facet queries. Basically, it's a summary view of a given field from the returned entities. So we could say that we want to return organizations that have the industry of renewable energy, and this is basically our original query here. Location address contains Texas. We want to facet by city name, and the fields you're going to want to return here are the count and the value, and you'll see what that means in just a second. But let's say we want 20 of these organizations, and so in this case city count. So within renewable energy in Texas, vast majority these firms are, in Houston, with roughly the other half in Austin or Dallas. But you get these other clusters. There are 51 renewable energy companies around Corpus Christi or Lubbock, and you can probably imagine how this, in a localized industry, could be very useful information. And we could do the same thing, but we could facet by industry. So this would show a bit of co-occurrence here. So obviously these are all renewable energy companies. You can see the same count number. It's saying that every renewable energy company listed is also an energy company. Oops. Every renewable energy company is also an energy company. But you can start to see that, they're very different types. The most common is solar energy, followed by nuclear. Then you get down to wind energy or climate change organizations, and there aren't nearly as many, at least in this subset of orgs from Texas. So one additional sort of building block I want to show here for an informal dashboard is, with this article data, you can essentially generate a news feed. All I'm doing here is actually format this real quick. All I'm doing here is a similar call where I'm saying return all articles that have been tagged with, and this is the unique identifier for Calpine right here, and return in this case title, return in this case sentiment, or return in this case text, return in this case the page URL that it was originally published on. As well as the sentiment. And, so if you start pulling in things like date and sentiment, you can aggregate values and you can make a chart of how sentiment's changing over time. You can filter for the best or the worst news. You can look at the last week's news, but essentially we have the building blocks here of a very informal dashboard. So, we have sort of a view of our competitors. We could chart all of this. We have sort of a over the macro view of the industry as a whole, and then we have an article feed. We could even say that this is Calpine articles and make a separate tab that is Reliant Energy articles, or we can sort of have this where we can jump into each one of these individual competitors in more detail. So that's really all I had planned for our talk today. Was really working through these data types and methods that you can employ in Google Sheets and Excel. As I mentioned, this is not a way to make the classiest dashboard in the world, but you can start to very quickly, in a matter of 30 minutes or an hour, depending on your familiarity with DQL, start to cobble together these sort of building blocks directly from a spreadsheet. It's something, it's a format you can play around in. You can take the data and do some sort of informal analysis, and without really needing to bring in a technical team member into the loop. And we do see these techniques used fairly often for market intelligence, for sales, for ABM list building, data enrichment, or finance use cases. So yeah, thanks for attending, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Until next time.